Todos e todas. Eu sou Renata Tomás e nessa manhã vou conduzir essa conversa e vai falar sobre novas estratégias do trabalho de plataforma na América Latina. E quero começar dizendo que é um prazer, uma honra poder estar aqui nesse evento tão grande e tão essencial na discussão do futuro do trabalho. E também é uma honra poder receber pessoas de partes diferentes do mundo na minha cidade, no meu país, num momento tão bacana. Quero agradecer a organização do evento pelo convite para eu estar aqui. Uma alegria. Quero agradecer a presença dos nossos convidados e agradecer também cada pessoa que está aqui participando e se inserindo nessa discussão. Agradecer também, de forma especial, o trabalho dos tradutores, dos intérpretes. É sempre um trabalho muito incrível que faz todas as vozes, né, chegarem a todas as pessoas. Muito bom. Bom, como vocês estão vendo o título, e como eu já disse, a gente vai falar sobre as novas estratégias do trabalho de plataforma na América Latina. E a nossa conversa aqui ela vai ter um duplo movimento, digamos assim. A gente vai começar olhando um pouco para os diagnósticos feitos a partir de um levantamento, de um mapeamento feito pela Fairwork Foundation, para a gente poder identificar de que maneira que os trabalhadores na América Latina estão lidando com as dificuldades, os entraves, mas não apenas apontando os problemas, mas, de alguma forma, apontando como eles estão criando soluções, como eles estão criando formas de enfrentamento. E, num segundo momento, a gente vai se voltar um pouco mais para o caso do Chile. Vamos ver um pouco como que os trabalhadores de plataforma nesse país estão criando oportunidades, estão criando estratégias e táticas de diferentes maneiras. Bom, a gente vai ter, no final da nossa sessão, a oportunidade de fazer perguntas. Não todos vão ter essa oportunidade, mas alguns. Então, se te interessa, se você gostaria de fazer uma questão, se você gostaria de comentar algo que foi dito aqui, quero te encorajar a se preparar e a aproveitar esse momento final para interagir um pouco mais com os nossos convidados e a nossa convidada. A gente vai começar com a apresentação do Jonas Valente e do Alessio. Quero rapidamente apresentá-los, mas vou fazer uma apresentação breve e vocês fiquem à vontade de complementar o que vocês acharem importante e oportuno com relação ao que vocês vão falar sobre a formação de vocês, sobre a atuação de vocês. Bom, o Jonas ele é co-lead na Cloudwork Project, na Fairwork Foundation, e é pesquisador pós-doc na Oxford Internet Institute. E o Alessio Bertolini também é um pesquisador pós-doc na Fairwork Foundation, onde ele coordena algumas pesquisas que têm sido desenvolvidas tanto em países da Europa quanto da América Latina. Bom, muito obrigada pela presença de vocês, pela participação de vocês, e fiquem à vontade.
Obrigado, Renata. Bom dia a todos e todas. Em primeiro lugar, cumprimentar, uma honra também te conhecer, Renata, os nossos colegas que a gente já se conheceu. Como lembrou muito bem o Zanata, né, os momentos de interação pós-evento também são muito importantes para que a gente possa se conhecer melhor. Agradecer a organização do evento, ao ITS, ao PCC, muito obrigado à Man, que nos acompanhou, nos guiou nesse processo todo, ao Trébor e a toda a equipe, né, do consórcio. E pedir desculpa, eu vou fazer minha apresentação em inglês, porque a gente vai dividir, eu e o Alessio aqui, a apresentação do Fairwork. Como disse Renata, eu, juntamente com o Alessio, o Fairwork é baseado na Universidade de Oxford e no VZB Center em Berlim, mas eu sou brasileiro, pesquisador aqui, venho de uma história jornalista de formação, com um doutorado em Sociologia e com pesquisas no campo de trabalho em plataforma. Então, a gente está muito feliz de poder estar aqui. Acho que ontem a gente já teve um início de conversa sobre a importância das questões do trabalho e hoje a gente vai abordar isso um pouco mais. So, I'll start to speak in English. I hope to our interpreters that my English is clear enough so I don't give you a hard time. Thank you, Aman, so much for inviting us here. So, the first thing, let me see if I can handle this properly. Okay. So, unfortunately, platform economy doesn't bring only opportunities, it also brings harms and risks. So when we're talking about the platform economy, we're talking in a lot of examples of low pay. We're talking about workers receiving much less than the minimum salary. And this is not only in one or another country. We're talking about the whole world. We're talking about global north and global south. So this is a very important challenge. A second challenge are unsafe working conditions. We're talking about physical harms. We have workers that get killed doing delivery. We have workers that get killed transporting someone from one point to another. But we're also talking about mental health issues. For example, translators and transcribers that receive disturbing recordings, and they have to deal with that in the most of times without a safety net. We're talking about discrimination of gender, race, and geography. So this is super important, and in the research we've been conducting on cloud work platforms, this is super present when we have workers from the global south facing this kind of discrimination, especially when the clients and requesters are from global north. We're talking about individualization. So platform work, of course, as platform co-ops, is not unique. It's not a monolith. We're talking about a range of experience. And sometimes you have experience where workers can get together, as in Brazil, what we call the breques, so the strikes, little protests. But at the same time, you have workers that can find other workers. You're working from your home, and you can even, in some platforms, workers are prohibited to talk to each other. So we're talking about a very structural problem of weak bargain position. And if workers cannot collectively organize, they have a problem and have challenges to demand their rights. And what does the Fairwork project do? We're not talking only about to understand platform work. This is our main goal, but we are also an action research project. So yes, we want to change the platform economy to ensure more rights. And how do we do that? First of all, not being only an Oxford project trying to talk about the world. Our project and our principles were developed in a dialogue with South African scholars, Indian scholars, and now they are taking almost 40 countries, researchers, to discuss how we do research and how we can engage with platform workers. We structure our assessment, so basically what we do is we select platforms and then we assess them according to 5 principles. The first principle is fair pay. So how to ensure that workers receive at least the minimum wage after costs and the local living wage after costs. The second one is fair conditions. So how platforms employ or not employ specific measures to avoid the risks of platform work and how they provide a safety net to workers. For example, helmets, equipments, training, and all sorts of measures and conditions that can avoid this kind of risks. We're talking about fair contracts. Unfortunately, we find platforms that don't have a contract. Or even if they have a contract, it's not like accessible. It's not clear to understand. It's hidden in different policies. So it's super important. It's kind of a basic standards. The worker can understand, access this contract, but not only this, that the clauses of the contract are not unfair. And unfortunately, another problem that we see a lot is that platforms trying to exempt themselves from liability. So if something goes wrong, the worker cannot access, cannot enter with a lawsuit against the platform, and this is super important. Fair management. So when we're talking about fair management, if a worker is in his home or her home, or it's on the street and something happens, you have to have a due process where the worker can first access the platform and talk to a human representative and not only a bot. And if the platforms take a disciplinary action, such as a penalty or even deactivation, the worker should have, or the workers as a whole should have the right to appeal to that. And this appealing process cannot be arduous. At the same time, when we mention conditions, we're talking about equity. So it's crucial that platforms can implement anti-discriminatory policies. And finally, fair representation. If we're talking about working arrangements, workers need to have their representation and free association recognized. We're talking here about not only the freedom as association of some space or forum designed by platforms. We're talking about workers freely choosing their representatives. And we have a point that is the support or democratic governance. And that's when we are valuing and highlighting the role of platform co-ops. So when a platform is a platform co-op, it gets this extra point, 5.2, because we understand that democratic governance is a super, super important feature of what platform economy should be. So one thing that the project does is to understand that we have two types of platforms. The first type of platform is what we call location-based. So we're talking about delivery, transportation, or healthcare. And these kind of platforms have specific features that is different, for example, from what we call online work or cloud work platforms. A problem that cloud workers face is how to get paid for their works. When we talking about, for example, freelance work, or someone that is doing annotation of data for artificial intelligence. And when we do the score, we have a scale from 0 to 10. We have 5 principles. Each principle has 2 points. So we assess the platforms according to that 10 points, and at the end we have that scoring. But that scoring is not done in a very, how do I could put it, let's see. Help. I'll keep talking, and when we can move forward with these slides, okay. So how do we do research? First of all, we do research dialoguing with workers, dialoguing with platforms. So the whole process of scoring is a process of listening. It's a process of engaging and discussing the situation of this platform economy. It's not something top-down. It's something that is built. For an example, in Brazil, we're going to start our process with a stakeholder workshop, trying to listen to all those stakeholders here. And we do a desk research to try to gather all kind of documents, policies, and information that we have on platforms. We do workers' interviews because we need, and this is a crucial moment of our research, is to listen to workers and how they evaluate their experience on Fairwork. And of course, we talk to platforms because unfortunately, platforms are not transparent in many cases, so we need to ask them for additional evidence. And with these 3 types of methodologies of data collection, we can have our last score. And after our last score, we engage again with stakeholders, again with workers to see, okay, we're not only scoring platforms, we're trying to provide this so workers' organizations, civil society organizations, and platforms can take a look at that and do something. And at the same time, we want to present that to consumers. So consumers can see how platforms are scored. So if I'm, for example, ordering a delivery, do I want to deliver on that platform? What's his score? So this is super important for us to create an awareness, not only on workers, but also on consumers. So I'm going to pass to Alessio now, and I'm just going to finish it saying that the relation of Fairwork and platform co-op is super important because we want to learn with the platform co-op world. We want to rank platform co-ops in a very constructive way. And at the same time, I believe that Fairwork can help to understand how we have truly platform co-ops and how we can avoid some kind of fair washing or movements from platforms to trying to use cooperatives as a way to reinforce their business models. So this is a general presentation of Fairwork, and now Alessio will talk what we're intending to do specifically here in Latin America.
Thanks a lot, Jonas. I'm not sure this slide deck is working. Well, I can start anyway. Hopefully it will work soon. So what are we trying to do as well? So this is our basic, what Jonas just explained beautifully is really like our basic process. But we also have a lot of different kind of side projects in Fairwork. And what does it have to do with platform cooperative, you might ask? Well, first of all, as Jonah was saying, you know, like we really believe that platform cooperative can really be a solution. And what we found in Latin America, as in many other countries, is that platform cooperatives really have the potential to provide fairer platform work around the world, not just in the Latin American context. And we already have the few platform cooperatives that we've already rated. They are some of the highest scoring platforms in our sample. At the same time, as we've also heard here in the past few days, platform cooperatives present some important challenges and some important limits and barriers towards their development. And is it working? Yep. There you go. Nope. Sorry, little technical issue. Okay, you go on the other one. Yeah, no, previous one. I can do this if you want. Okay. So as I was saying, you know, like a lot of, so we've seen that they have really the potential to provide fairer work around the world, but at the same time they present many challenges. And at the same time, what we've been doing our fieldwork research in over 30 countries, we've also seen that there are many workers and many worker collectives who would like to establish cooperatives, would like to establish platforms with alternative governance and more democratic and solidarity models. But at the same time, they face many constraints when it comes to knowledge. They don't know how to do it. They lack the tools. They lack the infrastructure to do so. And that's why we had the idea to gather people from the central team, me, Jonas, Adam, Mark, but also people from our Ecuadorian team, particularly Belen Albornoz, to really establish a new kind of side project for Fairwork studying platform cooperatives in Latin America. And why Latin America? Well, first of all, in our research, we've seen that platforms tend to be rated quite low in Latin America. As you probably all know, is an area of the world characterized by high inequality, high informality of work, but at the same time is also one of the most fertile regions. We heard a lot of very interesting and valuable examples in the past few days about alternative platform models, platform cooperatives, and so on. And we're seeing a digital labor platform really gaining associative power, community ownership, and helping really people to come together. Sorry. to use resources. But many problems still persist. So we have a problem of scale. They were saying yesterday about scale, not in terms of just breadth, but also in terms of depth of scale. There is a problem of competition with more established capitalist platforms, which have generally more financial backing, generally from venture capital. There is a problem of coordination. Platforms tend to be quite small. They're finding problematic to expand, but also in terms of access to technology, because many of the workers then sometimes have access to very limited data or very limited technology. mistake. There we go. So what do we want to do with our project? Well, we want to explore, map, and advocate for the development of platform cooperativism in the region by using two main principles, tech for good and fair by design. So the idea that technology can really help improving the working conditions of workers, but also the platforms can be fair by design. So it can already be designed to have fair working conditions inbuilt in the system. And our initiative is structured around 3 levels, or in academic jargon, work packages, which are knowledge creation, networking events, and providing guiding resources and materials. Thanks. So what do we want to do with the first level? With the first level, we really want to investigate some of the things that we've already discussed. That's why we're here, basically. Some of the things we have discussed in this network, in this event. And it's really about exploring different aspects of platform cooperativism in Latin America. And particularly, we want our guiding research questions are really two. What do COPs fail? Where do COPs fail? Where do they fall short? What are the limitations in their the provision of services, in the working they're doing, in their expansion, in their growth, but also in their creation? And then what are the main constraints they face? You know, are they technological constraints? Are they mainly organizational constraints? Are they competition constraints? And so on. So we really would like to brainstorm with platform cooperatives around the region to explore whether, how we can help, basically. What can Fairwork do to help platform cooperativism in the region? And then in the second kind of work package, we would really like to bring platform cooperatives together. In a sense, we don't want to replicate or kind of compete with the amazing work that the Platform Cooperativism Consortium is doing, but also what other initiatives are doing here. We would really like to complement and support these initiatives as much as possible from the side of Fairwork. And we'd like to bring platform cooperatives together through regional and local events to talk to each other, to really knowledge exchange, to brainstorm solution, but also not just confining ourselves to platform cooperatives, but also to convene with different stakeholders, with unions, with software companies who are interested in the social economy and who would like to support platform cooperatives project in the region. Oh, no, wait a second. And so basically, it's really exchanging ideas. So what we found in our research is what is missing sometimes is simply knowledge. It's simply knowledge exchange. So really, for our worker collectives in Ecuador, it would be really valuable to know how a cooperative in Brazil was established. You know, what did it do? What were the main challenges? How did they solve the challenges? We would like to kind of brainstorm how they build democratic governance. How did they co-design platforms? But also the technological challenge in, you know, using open data, using open software, using coding, which are open. So really brainstorm and exchange with each other about potential solution. And with the third bit, we would like to really create, but I think the right word here would be co-create. So we would really like to collaborate, establish continuous cooperation with platform cooperative and interested stakeholders about a series of resources to support cooperatives directly. It could be policy briefs to influence government change in the policy sectors, but also guidelines, academic paper, and a handbook of digital cooperatives, but also trying to establish an infrastructure for platforms to continue cooperating in different dimensions when it comes to organization, when it comes to governance, when it comes to technological challenges, and so on. And we really believe that the project can really enroll cooperative platforms, NGOs, universities and research centers, financial institutions, and really any other social actors to really generate and circulate resources for scalability, for knowledge diversification, for assistance, and also for the creation and the expansion of the platform cooperative world around the world. So if we can just go to the next slide. So we are starting with 5 of the countries that are already part of our network. We will work closely with Rafael and from the Brazilian team and for the rest of the Brazilian team, but also with our Colombia team, Ecuador team, and Argentina team, but then we would really like to use it as really as a pilot, so that way we can then expand to other countries in the Latin American region, but also once we pilot it and kind of like establish this in Latin America, really replicate this initiative around the world, in Europe, in Africa, in Asia, and in North America. So I've already spoken too much, so I really leave the word to the next speaker, but thank you very much to everyone.
Obrigada, Alessia, obrigada, Jonas, por essa apresentação. E ouvindo aqui vocês falando sobre essa... Achei incrível, né, esse trabalho de vocês de buscar identificar esses critérios e esses pontos que vão ajudar a avaliar essas dinâmicas, né, que vão ajudar, de alguma maneira, a criar parâmetros para essas dinâmicas. E aí queria que vocês comentassem depois, no final da sessão, mas já vou falando porque aí vocês já podem ir pensando, dentro desse levantamento, desse diagnóstico, quer dizer, dessas conversas que vocês vão tendo com os trabalhadores, né, conforme vocês vão ouvindo esses trabalhadores, vocês conseguiram identificar algum campo, algum estado, né, enfim, algum governo, que, de alguma forma, possa ser pensado como um exemplo de boas práticas ou de práticas que estão se desenvolvendo de alguma forma, que vão... que estão avançando, né, que estão correndo um pouco mais rápido no sentido de atender essas demandas. E que demandas, né? Ouvindo vocês falando sobre essas urgências que surgiram nos campos, a gente vê dois pontos, né? Um tem a ver com as precariedades, e a gente relaciona diretamente à regulação, a gente relaciona diretamente aos direitos, mas tem uma outra coisa que aparece muito forte, que é uma certa literacia, quer dizer, um uso, né? Quer dizer, as pessoas saberem usar essas ferramentas, essas funcionalidades. Quer dizer, existe uma demanda por educação, né? E por educação digital. E me lembrei de um projeto de lei que está sendo votado aqui no Brasil, que é o projeto de lei 4513 da Política Nacional de Educação Digital, que trata não só das escolas, mas trata justamente inclui também os trabalhadores, né? Então, existe já no Brasil, por exemplo, esse entendimento de que é necessário haver uma educação digital para os trabalhadores, para que eles possam se desenvolver, melhorar suas condições de trabalho e, consequentemente, de vida. Então, ao final, queria ouvir um pouco de vocês, se vocês identificaram algum tipo de iniciativa, algum movimento, alguma tendência em alguns desses países nessa direção, a respeito disso. Tá bom? Bom, agora a gente vai partir para a nossa próxima convidada, Macarena Bonhomme. Bem-vinda, muito obrigada pela sua presença. Macarena é professora adjunta na Faculdade de Ciências Sociais e Humanidades da Universidade Autônoma do Chile e vai trazer um pouco para a gente da experiência do trabalho de cooperativa com migrantes. Quando eu vi um pouco, né, da sua apresentação, do título da sua apresentação, eu fiquei pensando que, quando a gente olha para migrantes que exercem esse tipo de trabalho, eu acho que a gente vê dois tipos de vulnerabilidades. A gente vê a vulnerabilidade pelo fato de serem migrantes e a gente vê a vulnerabilidade pelo fato de estarem em trabalhos de plataforma, que ainda não tem essa regulação, que tem condições precárias. Então, uma dupla vulnerabilidade. No entanto, essa experiência do Chile, ou desse grupo específico, parece que tem mostrado como eles estão conseguindo, de alguma forma, criar modos de enfrentar essas vulnerabilidades, né, a partir delas mesmas. Então, fiquei bastante curiosa para ouvir como eles estão fazendo isso, né, como eles estão quebrando essa intersecção. E, bom, acredito que vai ser muito interessante ouvir isso de você. A gente agradece a sua presença, a sua participação e, por favor.
Muito obrigada. I'm going to talk in English. First I want to thank the organizers for the invitation. I'm an academic, so in this case I'll share the results of a study we conducted in Chile. Yes, I'll try to do my best to keep it really slow. So, okay, we examined the role that international migration plays in the functioning of the gig economy. Since in many countries, migrants sustain platform work. So it is really important to like research and take a look at this situation, at this particular situation of migrants. In this presentation, I will mostly focus on how migrant workers navigate the Chilean platform economy. And we interviewed migrant workers from Venezuela, Colombia, Cuba, and Peru, working in food delivery platforms such as Rappi, Uber Eats, and Pedidos Ya. Drawing on interviews with 54 platform workers, both migrants and non-migrants, in Chile, and we conducted it between late 2019 and early 2022, we show how there is a mutual dependency between the platform economy and migration, as workers have become functional to platforms' interests since the way they navigate poor working conditions in order to secure a stable income also help platforms accumulate capital as they expand into new markets, as Barat et al. Suggests. We argue that not only the socio-technical structures of platforms, but also the migration policy environment significantly impacts migrant workers' labor agency. While migrants' everyday practices express their labor agency, this agency is constrained by their migration background and the algorithmically controlled and surveilled dynamic of platform work. On the one hand, platform work allows a relatively easy entry for migrants whose access to the labor market is otherwise restricted. And on the other hand, workers' ability to challenge the working condition is mostly limited to individual acts of covert resistance, and collective acts of resistance are still difficult to mobilize and sustain, unfortunately. As migrants are unable to access the formal labor market, as long as their visa applications are under consideration, they often find themselves vulnerable to multiple forms of exploitation and abuse. Okay? That is, the options for undocumented migrants, for instance, are essentially limited to choosing between poor and poorer working conditions in the informal economy. So against this background, the platform economy has provided temporary working opportunities for newcomers due to the low entry barriers that allows that the most excluded sector from the labor market can now be included, such as international migrants. Nevertheless, hostile migration policies continue to transfer migrants' vulnerable resident status to vulnerability in the labor market. Thus, it is not surprising that the platform economy also reproduces different forms of discrimination against Latin American and Caribbean migrants in Chile. These same conditions also make migrants ideal workers, as they can commit to flexible engagement and long working hours, and are apparently unlikely to resist them. Thus, for platforms, they are replaceable and disposable. Those workers who lacked access to other work opportunities since they are undocumented or were waiting for their visa applications often could not afford not to continue working on the platforms, especially due to their uncertain migration status. Thus, migrants are generally more disadvantaged than local workers, Chileans, since they only have access to the positions that are less remunerated and more vulnerable within the platform economy, which is the case of food delivery platforms in Chile, especially if they're undocumented and have to pay for having a fake valid account. For migrant workers, the need to work makes them a dependent labor force that cannot resist the conditions mandated by the platforms, as they simply cannot afford their accounts to be deactivated. Platforms feed off migrants' vulnerability then, and thereby manage to secure and control a workforce that will accept anything and everything just to be able to earn a living. It is true that workers are able to set the amount of time they are willing to work on the apps, but this choice is a constrained one. As many of you know probably, most platforms, at least in Chile, make use of shadow sanctions, where workers are punished indirectly through small orders that generate less income, and also use a so-called ranking system for organizing time slots and working times on the app. The higher the rank of a worker, the more he or she have access to time slots that are high in demand and subsequently earn more money. Our interviewees acknowledge that it is this ranking system that pushes them to be as active as possible on the apps, often going beyond the legal limit of an 8-hour workday. Thus, the eres tu propio jefe narrative, or you are your own boss narrative, that platforms use disguises the very real limits to migrant workers' labor agency. As Silvio, a Venezuelan activist that worked on the platforms, contends, and I want to, now that I have time, they exercised control, surveillance, the power to pay me. I'm not a partner, I'm not an entrepreneur, I'm an ordinary worker. What happens here is that this new employment, which they call the employment of the future, which is nothing, that in my opinion is a crude, vulgar exploitation of the working class where what they do is maximize their profits through an algorithm and enslave workers and play psychologically with their emotional stability, with their work and with their family, which is really, it coincides with what Jonas just told us. So in such a context, migrants have to put in place different strategies to navigate these difficulties and negotiate the controlled working conditions in the gig environment. We identified 3 strategies of resistance in which workers express a labor agency as they intentionally take action in their own interest in the space of production, in this case, the platforms. Migrant workers use first multi-apping. Second, some of them use borrowed or pirate accounts. And third, they participate in off-platform communities of riders. All of these strategies are used to navigate and tweak the conditions and control mechanism of platforms ever so slightly to their advantage. While these strategies do not have the power to alter the poor working conditions migrant workers experience in the platform economy, they do allow migrant workers to kind of rework them. Although these 2 strategies look as though they enable workers to circumvent some of the poor conditions they face, they also serve to deepen their vulnerable position by creating a further race to the bottom. This is because while the strategy of pirate accounts, for instance, allows getting around the difficulties of accessing some platforms, especially if they are undocumented, this strategy has turned into a business of its own, giving rise to an illicit market and essentially further restricting access to work if then they want to move to the formal labor market. These acts of labor agency revolve around workers' individual strategies and ways of making ends meet, rather than attempts to alter the structural dynamics of platform work. In this landscape, however, the workers' social media accounts have been key to collectively resisting platform control. As migrant workers meet others and come to realize their shared vulnerabilities, they also begin to unite around them. Thus, actively participating in social media communities of riders can be seen as a third strategy of resistance. Amidst the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020, migrant food delivery workers in Chile organized mass protests to demand better conditions, as they faced significant health risks by continuing to work on platforms. So the Twitter account Riders Ya, echoing the name of the food delivery platform Pedidos Ya, was formed by a Venezuelan migrant food delivery worker in order to expose poor working conditions and make demands. Through the account, migrant workers organized, engaged in protests, and even filed 2 labor complaints against this food delivery platform. However, even beyond the fear of being deactivated from platforms for engaging in strikes, for undocumented migrant workers, the fear of deportation prevents them from engaging in strike action or other forms of overt resistance. Only the few participants that took that risk had secure residency permits. So in conclusion, migrant workers are able to navigate platforms' control mechanisms and conditions to an extent, but they also know that actively resisting platform policies end up hurting them. Strategies used to navigate algorithms and labor dynamics, such as the use of borrowed or pirate accounts, entail risks. And organizing collectively and protesting in the streets has also resulted in the activation. However, it is interesting to note that these protests emerged from migrant workers, not nationals, not Chileans, which defies international literature and evidence suggesting that regular or undocumented migrants are less likely to appeal for better conditions or to unionize for fear of losing their jobs and or deportation. So while there is no evidence yet of the emergence of unions for delivery work in Chile, precisely because of the atomized nature of the work, in our study we were able to observe that some migrant workers did participate in collective organizations whose purpose was to expose these precarious conditions through social networks such as Twitter and Instagram, and thus made protest an anonymous activity that protected them from the potential deactivation of the platform on which they worked. And also in line with the political turmoil of the social outbreak or estallido social in 2019, where there were many protests in the streets. So it is quite interesting to notice like how also migrant workers did the same and also protest in the street. And I think they felt more comfortable doing so after this civil unrest and periods of civil unrest in Chile in that particular time. So I'm actually working on a research project to understand these particular forms of collective resistance and emergent social movements and compare the differences between migrant workers in their ways of resisting platforms' conditions according to their migration status, ethnicity, and gender, since, for instance, it is not the same taking such a risk if you are an undocumented Afro-descended woman. Thus, examining this through an intersectional approach allows understanding how the interaction of social category traces different experiences of inequality and exclusion. So the worker strikes in Latin America and elsewhere, in light of the pandemic, further demonstrate that the current system is increasingly unsustainable, and workers fight for their rights. And although that fight is not the same for everyone, new ways of resistance, covert or overt, have emerged, and we need to explore them in depth. And just to kind of take your like kind of question, I think yes, and I will add that also there is like a triple exclusion as well, because it's not only being migrant, also the ethnicity, right? But also as well like the migration status. We found out that it's really different and also makes migrant experiences diverse. So thank you.
Muito obrigada, Macarena, pela sua exposição. E também queria adiantar, né, um outro ponto, se você puder e quiser comentar ao final, que é uma outra coisa que fiquei pensando enquanto você apresentava, essa tentativa, né, essa busca de explicitar, de mostrar, de dar visibilidade a essas problemáticas, a esses processos de exclusão, de preconceito, enfim, a essas precariedades. O quanto que esses movimentos, por exemplo, esse que você cita do Riders Unidos, o quanto que esses movimentos conseguem se inserir no debate público, o quanto que isso consegue avançar em outros espaços da sociedade chilena. Quer dizer, eles conseguem impactar a opinião pública sobre esse tipo de trabalho, né? Eles conseguem levar outros setores a essa discussão, eles estão tornando isso um assunto público. Queria ouvir isso depois, no final da sessão. Agora a gente vai ouvir o Matias Bertrano. Bom, Matias é economista de formação e é pesquisador, pesquisador da Mapocho, no Chile. Bom, Matias, você também vai ajudar a gente a compreender um pouco mais o caso do Chile, mas numa perspectiva um pouco diferente, na medida em que você vai falar sobre o que a gente poderia dizer, não sei, ser um novo estágio do trabalho de plataforma. A gente tem visto crescimento no contexto da América Latina, de cada vez mais pessoas, por toda a precariedade, enfim, de tudo que a gente já tem ouvido aqui, nesses ambientes. Mas a gente, pelo que eu estou entendendo, né, é recente o crescimento de um movimento de criação das próprias cooperativas, quer dizer, esses trabalhadores organizando essas próprias cooperativas a partir das suas próprias experiências de trabalho. Então, acho que a gente pode estar falando, então, de não só de, não sei, de um novo estágio de trabalho de cooperativa, mas também de uma nova geração de trabalhadores, né? Talvez trabalhadores com outras competências, outro tipo de conhecimento. Então, acho que vai ser muito produtivo te ouvir e saber se é isso mesmo, né? Se a gente está falando de uma outra geração de trabalhadores nessa área. Muito obrigada pela sua presença, por estar aqui.
Obrigado. Thanks. I will speak in English. I'll leave the portuñol for later social events, maybe. And now, thanks to the organizers for the invitation. It's been very welcoming. And we wanted to talk a bit about the platform cooperatives in Chile, about what conditions have to happen, and how platforms are the cooperative opportunity to scale even more than sometimes it already happened. But to start, maybe a bit of an introduction. I come from Mapocho. Our purpose is to drive an economic, social, and cultural development in a fair and democratic manner through cooperation. We're an organization that practically focuses on working with groups of people, trying to get people together to achieve their goals, to make their lives better. This, of course, drove us to cooperativism, but we actually come from the world more of communication, and how we got to cooperatives is an interesting reflection of why we're doing what we're doing. Actually, Mapocho, back in the beginnings, comes from the TED Talk world. We were actually in Rio when the organization was just starting in 2014, so this is like a nice whole circle coming back to Rio for platform cooperatives. And in 2016, the Ministry of Economy asked us to make the TED Talk type of format, making something cool, something viral for the youth, showing cooperative entrepreneurship. So we were trying to show experiences of cooperative entrepreneurship in Chile, mostly focused on trying to bring young people into the movement, of trying to change the face of the movement. And that was, for a couple years, our work. Our work was showing a lot of cooperative experiences. But on the way, we started realizing that it was limited success what we were doing. We needed to push further on. And that's where we ran across, and we tried to bring innovation into the cooperative world. It was a world that wasn't very known for being innovative, especially in Chile. And that's where we ran across platform cooperatives and the whole movement of platform cooperatives, the Platform Cooperative Consortium. And we realized this can be a way that we can make the youth more involved. It talks to the problems of today, to the problems of platform work. And we were trying to say, how do we bring this to Chile? How can we create platform cooperatives in Chile? And we realized most of the cooperatives we were showing before were already dying. So not even normal cooperatives normal cooperative ventures were growing in Chile. Platform cooperatives were even harder. So that's where we passed from showing to doing. We realized we needed more and better cooperatives to show to the youth in Chile, to show to the people in general. We needed good examples, and that's where we're now trying to promote, create, and accelerate new cooperative ventures that can give solutions for the challenges of our contemporary world. And how has this been translated into concrete work? Well, we work with groups in Chile. We've been close to groups of platform cooperatives that are trying to create platform cooperatives, and this is where the bittersweet news comes. The bitter is that in Chile there is, I don't think, a real platform cooperative yet. There's some very good experiments. The best experiments come from the world of especially delivery, the writers. There's a group of writers that are organizing, trying to find resistance in their jobs, and there's also their own companies and some cooperatives showing up. There's already 2 or 3, and one of them is trying to work with CopCycle to bring CopCycle and create technology in Chile. But in a sense, we're still very far behind because of the own cooperative movement in Chile and also because of very specific conditions of our country of how cooperativism has played, and also because platform cooperativism is hard. It's not something very easy. So what we were trying to do was, while we were saying, okay, let's bring platform cooperatives, we said we need to do cooperatives in general, but also find a way to do it. And that's where we started investigating more. Apart from our more concrete work, we got a project financed by Fundación Copeuch, which is a big cooperative bank in Chile, and they let us finance a methodology for cooperative entrepreneurship. And we tried to systematize, I think you can say it that way, how to create a cooperative venture. And that's where we came with this model. So the model comes in the top 2 circles. A cooperative is a business that is created from a community's needs and hardships. So a community has a need, they have a problem they have to solve, and they find a business opportunity to solve that problem. Compared to normal ventures and what they teach you in business schools, you see a problem, you see a need, and you create a product for them, and you gain profit out of that problem. In the cooperative, it's the other way around. We have a need, we have a problem, and we solve it together, and we solve that need with a business opportunity. So we were thinking, how do we get a cooperative from the very beginning and turn it into a very successful cooperative? And we needed 6 steps, or the steps comes later, but we needed a whole path through, and we created these 3 components. And we said, a cooperative has to build 3 components at the same time. And here's where the social purpose appears. It's the very origin of the cooperative, and what we investigated we researched with 20 cooperatives, we interviewed them, also all the work we were doing. We realized they all had the social purpose very ingrained in them. It was their main driving factor. They also needed the business model, which is this business opportunity. How are they going to solve their social purpose? And then there's the democratic management, which is very own of the movement, very own of the cooperative structure, and also very beneficial, which creates social tissue, and a lot of the positive things we see in cooperatives comes from the democratic structure. And here's where I think I disagree a bit with some things that were said yesterday. I think Trevor said that first comes the business model, and then the rest. For us, without doing the 3 components together, you can't create a successful cooperative. And this is what we've been seeing in Chile. There's very successful cooperatives who have a very good business model, but they've left their social purpose behind. They've left even their democratic management behind. There's very good cooperatives with very good governance, very good cooperative structure, very good social purpose, but they haven't been able to fulfill their needs because they don't have a business model. So our question is, how do we create a path through, a toolkit maybe in the future, that will bring all 3 of these components together at the same time? So this has been a bit of our investigation, and then also we were thinking, okay, what are the problems that platform cooperatives are facing in Chile? We realized that technology was creating the means for broader and larger communities. In the circles that we said before, the community is very local. Cooperatives are very local, very physical. It was a local problem. But technology has created this different. Now communities can be even international, can be in a whole country, and they also face different problems. So cooperativism has finally an opportunity to scale not only from the local, but also scale internationally. And we said, okay, cooperatives, platform cooperatives in Chile, and also cooperatives in general, has 2 different types of problems. First, the material conditions that you need to, the challenges that you need to tackle to create platform cooperatives. First is the access to capital. I think this is not only, I think it's further horrible in the global south, but everywhere, access to capital for platform cooperatives is hard. It's very costly to build a functional platform, more costly than we think. And it's very costly to also, and that is the third one, I will just skip directly to that, to compete with the network effects that yesterday they were saying Google, that Rapid and Uber, they already have that network effect, a very competitive market to get into, or competitive in the sense that you can't break through because it's actually a monopoly or oligopoly. So the entry costs are very hard. And the second, and that's happening in Chile now, is scarce institutional help. There is a change with the new government, there is a change happening in some local governments of more institutional help, but it's still nowhere close to what's happening in the global north compared to what's happening in Chile. I don't know here the exact same situation, but we've seen something similar in other governments or other countries in the south. But there's also something which is the subjective conditions. So the material conditions, they're, I think, in my opinion, they're further away. They need much more policy work. They need much more work with the whole network of factors. The subjective condition is something we can change from inside the movement, and it's the need to change our own notion of cooperatives and their functionality, and these are also more specific to platform cooperatives. So what are 3 subjective conditions that have to happen to create platform cooperatives? First, this redefinition of what is a community and coming to terms with it. Coming to terms to what are the problems of this new type of communities, these technological communities. They have new needs, new necessities. So in this systematization of the needs and the opportunity, we need to find out how to tackle the needs of the new type of communities. The second is, and this is what brought us to cooperatives in the first place, it's a model that is rarely understood or even known. Even inside the cooperative movement, we have like problems understanding it. Outside, in Chile, nobody knows it. There's very little understanding of the model, and we have to change that. We have to show it more. There's been very good productive talk in this conference about this, and we think we're advancing in this subjective condition. Platform cooperatives is a second step. We're double-click in the same problem. And the third is this about conservative views and inertia inside the cooperative movement. And this is something we have to solve. I know in Chile it's happening. I've heard here in Brazil there's also some of this happening, that the same cooperative movement has had an inertia to advance in technology, an inertia to advance in platforms, because platforms are a bit different. They come to solve different things. So that is a subjective condition we have to change, and it's also something we can do very inside the movement. So just to finish, I think I'm perfect with time. I have 3 questions, not only for panelists, for us, but for the whole conference, and something that we can reflect upon. First is, how do we build trust in these new communities? And this is a question which is specifically hard for the Global South, I think. In Chile, we have very low levels of social tissue. The dictatorship, neoliberalism, different factors practically created that there's no connection between the people. Also the fact that people are having to live day by day, and they don't have the time or the energy to, at the end of the day, also organize politically or try to create social tissue organizations. It's already hard to build normal cooperatives. How do we build trust in this new type of communities? And there's several answers there. I know some people would say blockchain, some people would say talk more, some people would say political organizations. So we have to solve this question to advance in platform cooperativism. The second is, how do we have to change our concept of a traditional cooperative structure? And this is my polemicist question, because some cooperative fundamentalists, I think even me, would get a bit uncomfortable saying, let's change the one person, one vote. Let's change the way that the democratic management works in cooperatives. But maybe it's a question we have to ask. How do we bring investment into cooperatives without changing the cooperative structure? Or how can we model our cooperative structure to bring in investment? And third, how do we balance the top-down co-op building with the community empowerment? And what do I mean by this? In Chile, I know also in other countries of Latin America, cooperative building has been very top-down. Even though there's the community need, there's institutions, even institutions like ours, that try to work with communities to try to build the cooperatives. But in the end, most of the business model of the knowledge of building businesses comes from the outside or from a top position, from a municipal government. There's local governments that are working with cooperatives. And how do we balance that with the community empowerment, and that the cooperatives that we're building will not depend on the top-down building? This is also a question we have to answer, because of course we need to bring the whole ecosystem together. It's okay that we have outside institutions, even foreign institutions, helping build cooperatives, but we still need to focus on the cooperatives being sustainable by themselves, of the communities being empowered and having democratic management in them all. And thank you very much for the space.